Hi, welcome to FamSociology. On this chapter, children, yes or no? Now, one of the primary functions of family is to have children. In this chapter, we're going to look at a variety of issues surrounding this task. The recent trend is that the Canadian family is shrinking, as we discussed in the previous chapter. And there are many sociological reasons for this. Parents are having fewer children, and some couples decide not to have children. Not all pregnancies are planned or wanted, and there are several options available to those parents who find themselves in this situation. This can include abortions, adoptions, and foster care. Now, other couples may increasingly or intensely want children, but are unable to conceive them themselves. So, for those prospective parents, adoption is still an option, but advances in reproductive techniques and technologies such as IVF or in vitro fertilization and surrogacy, making having a biologically related child more possible. But these procedures also arouse several ethical and social issues. So we're going to begin with enlarging the family circle of bringing children into the family. There are several and various reasons, both personal and social, for having children. Having children is somewhat of a marker in our society. Now, if you think about the symbolic interactionalists, the symbols of having children, passing out cigars, or having baby showers, these are symbols which are markers in our society about we're having a child. And so not only is it a marker, but it also depicts status, and it's an important developmental task, one of the things that families achieve going through and developing as a family of procreation. In order to have a family of procreation, that is where we have children. So in the past, couples had relatively limited choice. Have a child or have children or not. With changes in the law and easy contraception, availability of abortion, prenatal diagnosis, and technologies to assist conception, there may be many more options. So we'll need to touch on fertility. Fertility in Canada has been changing over time. Not only is marriage declining, so is having children. So fertility is the number of children born on the average. I'm going to repeat that. Fertility is the number of children born and the average age at childbearing. Now this, you may imagine, can really affect Canada's population or the demographics, the makeup of the Canadian population. Fertility rates represent the total number of children a woman is expected to have over the course of her reproductive life. Now currently, to replace the Canadian population, that is to keep it static, it doesn't grow and it doesn't diminish, we have that population growth needs to be about 2.1 per woman in their reproductive years. Now we have been below that replacement number since 1972, so our population increase has been very, very marginal. Now we have moved generally in Canada from large families in a rural existence at around Confederation, so that may be around 1867. Families looked after themselves. There was no welfare. There was no old age pension. There were no additional supports for families. Children were expected to help. In fact, children weren't considered children, and they didn't have a childhood like we seem to understand what childhood is. They were put to work. They were expected to help. The more children you could produce, the better. In 1851, the average woman produced, or family, and the woman would have an average of 6.56 children per woman in a reproductive lifetime, compared to 2.1 just to maintain the population. And we'll see what the Canadian population's fertility rate is today. As we moved To the turn of the century, the 20th century, therefore that was in the early 1900s, families began to shrink. As families moved to the cities from the rural areas, women gained the right to vote and began to enter into higher education, but in small numbers. The Great Depression and World War II had a big influence on the Canadian families. By 1937, the total fertility rate was 2.64. So from the early 1900s, late 1900s, around 1860 to 1880, that was 6.56, and now we're at 2.64 by 1937. After the war, there was an increase in economics. The post-war bump. Usually wars produce a boost to the economy after a war. Families were reunited after the war, babies were born, and the baby boom peaking at around 3.9 children per woman in 1959. With the advent of that increased availability of contraception, the decline of the moral reality of religion in terms of how people interpreted that and made use of it, and an increase in the woman's post-secondary education, it led to a decline in the fertility through the 60s. Now here's where our comparison comes into, from 6.56 down to 2.64, and the current rate, relatively current rate, 2011, was 1.61 children per woman. The general trend over the past 40 years has been declining, and we are older when beginning a family today compared to in the past. Now, another term that's used to describe family growth or decline is what's known as crude birth rate. So this is the number of live births during a year per 1,000 people in a population. So crude birth rate has been declining since the 70s. Now, we have attempted to compensate for the decline or the boost in the birth rate in several ways in Canada. One of the things that was done by government was to include what's known as a family allowance program, money that was for children under the age of 16. Now, it was a modest amount of money and offered during the baby boom, so we're not really sure whether the impact for the boost was the baby boom or the family allowance program. Additional issues that affect the fertility rate are cultural, based on one's home country. Immigration uses a point system, and it promotes work skills and education, likely late to the childbearing game, if you will. Immigrants affected by acculturalization, where they adopt the new country's fertility rates, or immigrating may postpone children to settle in the new country. Now, clearly, in Canada, family size is shrinking. So why is the Canadian family shrinking? What are all the implications of how that's happened? We're going to explore, having fewer children and the starting late in life of having children. That's certainly part of it. But what other social factors can influence family size? And we'll start with education. Education, where more frequently women are putting off having children in order to get their education, and it leads to better careers. Both education and careers of which can and do delay having children until they establish themselves. So there's one social factor. Secondly, employment. It used to be that families had one wage earner, and that was typically the man, the husband. Today, families benefit when there are two wage earners and incomes. Now, as you may know, more women are working, and therefore that lowers the fertility rate. If you want to stay in your job, you don't have children right away. Now, the third is medical science. Medical science is responsibility for two big impacts on the childbirth rate. One, the pre- and postnatal care. As a result, there are fewer examples of infant mortality, which is the number of deaths of children in their first year of life. And then secondly, the contraception. The 1960s came out with the pill. and these impacted the reduction of the fertility rate. A third group of reasons were financial reasons. The average cost to raise a child to the age of 18 years of age is between $250,000 and $284,000. That could be a reason why we are creating fewer children. Education costs would be added on top of that. Another reason, individual choice. This area is a very broad and it's very mixed. What we can say is that in spite of the individual or couple reasons, there may be many and varied, family size is still shrinking. The quality of the relationship, the stability of the finances, their overall health, all contribute to this decline. Now, there's a term that's used in sociology quite often to describe the sort of expectations that are on people, and that's what's known as the social script. There's still a great deal of social pressure to have children. They are following the social script. You're supposed to start having children after you get married, shortly after, and have children. So if you've been married and it's 5 years in and you haven't had children, you might start hearing people say, so, when are you going to have kids? That's the social pressure around the social script. You're supposed to. Now, one such pressure also comes from the myth of motherhood. Now, the myth of motherhood says that motherhood is an instinct that can be very fulfilling for women in a way that no other experience can. Now, another part of the myth is that there's an importance to having a child of each sex. Without these points, the family is not felt to be complete. Now, that is a myth of motherhood, so let's emphasize that. Some unmarried women choose to have children without a long-term partner, still fulfilling the myth of motherhood? Maybe yes, maybe no. Family planning is the process of intentionally deciding the number and the timing of births. This includes the when and if to use contraception, whether or not abortion, adoption, or fertility testing or any treatment is needed. A quick review we're going to do on the sociological perspective on having children. And we're just going to touch on each of the theorists that we've been looking at throughout the semester just to see their general view on having children. Now, we'll start with the structural functionalists, where their focus is on having children as a necessary function. Remember, one of their things is every structure in society, of which family is one, has a function. And if you're doing the function, then you are contributing to the stability of society. And so that's one of the necessary functions that families need to do in perpetuating the strength of a society. The developmental approach, they see that having children is part of the developmental tasks that is part of most families. Moving through your developmental tasks, one of those components is having children. Now, conflict theorists, their suggestion is that the social pressure to have children reflects the prevailing ideology of society. So how families with children have greater social advantages than those without. Richer families seem to be more successful and can offer more things for their children than families from poorer families. Poorer families don't seem to have the same resources available to them. Now, system theories looks at how decisions to have children creates different subsystems that can affect the family dynamic. The ecological approach looks to how the wider society context influences families' decisions to have children. It also, determines experiences of families with children. Symbolic interactionalists, they always focus on the personal meetings that occur between husband and wife and children, about their reasons for having or not having children. So there's that dialogue around choice. And then the feminist theories, they tend to study childbearing as an issue reflecting women's control over reproduction and the role that plays. Who has control over reproduction, the woman over her body in terms of producing children? Is it the woman? Is it the husband? Is it the doctor? Is it the government? So, there we are at a beginning stage of children, yes or no. And we've completed part 1, and we'll look at part 2 in the next video. Bye for now.